Today I'm going to install front struts on this 2005 Chrysler Town & Country touring package. First thing you want to do is get the back wheels with some chocks underneath them so it doesn't roll backwards. Get it jacked up on some jack stands so you got these front wheels off the ground. Once we get this thing up in the air, get this front wheel off, we'll get busy putting these struts on along with these sway bar links. Once you've got that wheel off and safely tucked away, you got some work to do down below and some up here. There are 3 nuts up here. These are 13 millimeter. You're going to want to go ahead and take the back 2 completely out. Take this front one, get it almost loose, but leave a couple turns in there so that it holds it in there. Down below we've got these 2 big bolts. Those are 21 millimeter. They should have splines in here, so you shouldn't need to hold this end. Shouldn't need to hold the head of the bolt because they've got splines. We'll get an impact gun on this 21 millimeter nut. We'll back these 2 out. You can see you've got your brake line has got a small bolt going into the strut assembly, so that'll have to come loose. We're going to replace these sway bar links. So here's the top one. That's a 18 millimeter nut. There is a Torx inside that you could hold that and turn it, or you can get something around the back and hold it. Since we're replacing these, we don't care too much. We can squeeze it with vice grips or whatever. Down on the bottom, that one's a little more difficult to get to. I've gone ahead and taken a block of wood and kind of pounded it in there, so that when I take that sway bar link loose, it'll hold that sway bar approximately right where it's at, so it doesn't go springing out on me. It's not a bad idea for what it's worth to go ahead and just spray these threads down with some penetrating oil up there on the sway bar link as well, especially this one down below here that's going to be a little harder to get to. We'll get those lubed up. We'll get our 21 millimeter socket.
Okay, I was already out. Hey.
See if we can get these to come loose. Probably not, so it's breaker bar time. And you really should have a 21 millimeter deep socket for this job because my impact gun did not go all the way into the socket here. Alright, after a quick trip to AutoZone to get a 21 millimeter deep socket, we are ready to roll. My electric impact would not break this loose, so I got a 25-inch breaker bar on here, 1/2-inch drive. And she's moving. Okay, got that one. And you should not have to hold the nut head over here because there are splines. If you for some reason did, that would be a 21 millimeter as well. This is going to give me a little bit of trouble because, well, the breaker bar kind of goes on at an angle down on this bottom one, but I got a pretty decent angle. And she's broke loose there, so. Once you've got those nuts off, you can take a hammer and you can carefully bang on these on the very tip. I don't particularly care about these bolts because the new struts that I bought came with 2 new bolts. So if I hit this and beat up the threads, not a big deal. But if that's not the case for you, it's a good idea to just go ahead and put these nuts on. That'll protect your threads a little bit. Alright, there's the bottom one. I've got these 2 big bolts popped out, so the battle's pretty much won there. Eventually I'll knock them on out. Now I'm going to take this bolt loose that's holding on this brake line, holding it on to the strut assembly. That is a 10mm back there. That bracket slides over it, as you can see there. Just going to go ahead and put this bolt back in here for safekeeping. The next step is to take this upper nut off of this sway bar link. That's an 18mm nut. There is a star bit in here that you can stab one in there, hold it, and then spin this nut off with a wrench. Otherwise, you can take a pair of vice grips, get back here, and clamp it. In my case, I don't particularly care about this sway bar link because I have new ones. So if I booger something up, it's not a big deal. So work on getting that out. Okay, do a little better job there. I'm blaming it on the vice grips. We'll try a different pair. Made some progress, but we're not all the way there yet. Oh, just keeps stripping out my vice grip area there. This thing's being a real fighter, so I went ahead, got a wrench on here, went ahead and basically screwed that nut back on by turning the bolt. That's exposed some threads up there. Now I'm going to go ahead and take a wire brush, clean those threads real good, spray them with some penetrating oil, see if I can back it all the way out this way. What I was using there was a T40 Torx bit. Go ahead and pretty much get these out, leave one of them in just to kind of hold things in place. Be a little careful with this bottom one. It's pretty close to this brake cable, brake line here, anti-lock brake line. If you need to, stick a screwdriver or punch in there, and I'm going to get one of those out, leave the top one in. She didn't move when I pulled that top one out, so got lucky there, I guess. But alright, so we got everything pretty much loose down here. So we'll go up top and we'll get those 3 bolts out up there. 3 nuts off up there, excuse me. Now up top, with a little bit of work, you can get those 3 13mm nuts off of there. We'll go ahead and leave this last one here hanging on by a thread. And when we're ready down below, we'll undo the last thread or 2 and then we'll pop that strut out of there. This is one of those locations where a gear wrench works really nice. So I got this first one out, then put it on, 1 or 2 turns. Get these other 2 completely off, we'll go from there. With the problem solvers, they do give you new nuts, so if you lost one, it wouldn't be the end of the world. But you might want to just reach back there and get this last one with a magnet. If yours don't come with new nuts, these are a bit unique, so you don't want to lose one down in the suspension somewhere. I went ahead and put a bucket down here just so if when the strut comes out, that this whole knuckle rotor assembly doesn't just slam way down and put a lot of stress on the CV joint. So now we'll go ahead, we'll get this last bolt all the way out of there. She's pretty loose now. The only thing that's holding it is that top one little nut with a couple turns on it up above. So I'll go ahead and get that. Okay, all 3 are off up top, so everything should be loose in here. So something's going to give here pretty soon. Alright, something gave, and down, and out she comes. Got a little more room now to get to that bottom bolt on that sway bar link, so we can work on that next. Here's the old strut on the ground. The main problem I was having with this one is when we would turn the steering wheel, you could hear a clunk, and that clunk was definitely coming from up here. I could reach up here and grab this and have someone turn the steering wheel, and I could feel that clunk. And we'd hear that when we go over bumps and take certain turns. Now on these, you want to notice that these holes down here are perfectly round. The new ones are going to have an oblong hole, so that's where your caster or camber alignment basically is going to be able to get whacked out. So you're going to have to take it in, get it aligned after you do this. I've got the vice grips on the back side of that sway bar link, 18mm 1/2 inch drive, long ratchet. Took quite a bit, but I broke it loose. I'm trying to be careful here that I don't kind of back my ratchet into a corner where I can't get it out, so I'm checking every once in a while to make sure I can still get it off of there. I may have to finish up with an 18mm wrench just to be safe. We'll go ahead and get that nut off of there, and then that'll just pull right out and you'll be ready to put the new one on. Okay, a few turns with a regular wrench, and I got the nut off the back of there. just a touch of gentle persuasion. And that'll come all the way out. I'm going to leave this one in there just so I can grab the new one and kind of size it up next to it and make sure that it's the same thing. There's a little note on the new one, and it says mount upper grease fitting to front. So if this goes in like that, this would be backwards because that grease fitting is towards the back. So we'll turn it around, and now if this went in like that, then that upper grease fitting would be toward the front. So it goes in like this. So now that I've figured that out, take this one out. Drop that one in. Get the nut on back here. These actually have a flat edge right here, where instead of vice grip slipping on a round surface, you can actually get a wrench in here. So a little better design. So I'm going to go ahead and get that one tightened up. No big deal there. Make sure we grease it, and then it's time to slip the new strut in. I've got that nut tight in the back. Now I'm going to go ahead and pop the grease gun on there. Oops. Might have been a little too much. It's squirting out the back. But the first pump didn't go in. The last pump pretty much all squirted out the back. We'll wipe that off. We'll go on down the road. So maybe 2 pumps on the top one. Up on the top I could see it a little better. Put 1 pump of grease in there and I could see this outer bubble fill up and get hard. So really just 1 pump of grease is all you need in there. The struts are marked left and right. When I looked on Amazon, it said that this particular model did not fit my 2005 Chrysler Town & Country, but the Moog website said that they do. I looked at some of the reviews and people said, yep, fits great on my 2005 Chrysler Town & Country. So I'm setting these side by side and I'm looking at them. And basically the only way you see the big difference is when you look at it from the top. You can see that kind of on this side over here, it's cut away. I'll lift up the other one and you'll see that its cutaway part is on the other side. I've got these facing the same direction. When you look at them from above, this left one is cut out here on the right, but this one's cut out over here on the left. That's because this is the right shock. And if you also look at it, the bolts are not in the right spots either. Okay, here's the left one that I took out, cut away on the right. Here's the new one. It's the model number with the L on the end, cut away on the right, bolt straight down, up there, same over there. So this is the left shock. Strut, I should say. I'm going to go ahead and throw this one in there. Try not to scratch the paint. I'm a little pooped, but I got one bolt in, or one nut on up on top. This comes with new bolts and nuts. You can see these bolts have the splines. Alright, one bolt in. Okay, now this bottom slot is not a hole, it's a slot. So we're just going to kind of, once we get it tightened down a little bit, we'll move it until we're kind of in the middle of that slot and we'll call it good. So I'm going to go ahead and tighten these bolts down, get them tight, and we'll come back. Kind of an unusual deal, but I put in the new bolt that came with it. I mean, they look pretty close to the same, but when I put it in there, it spun real easy. So I'm going to reuse the old bolts. They tend to grab more, and there's nothing wrong with them, so we're going to reuse those old bolts. I don't know what the story is there, but they work better, so I'm using them. So I'm glad when I took these bolts out that I used some good techniques and put the nuts back on and drove them out. Now the threads on these are still in great shape, so we'll go ahead and get those tightened up and come back. Actually, the old bolts started spinning in there as well, so we'll have to use a wrench on them. So let's see, while I'm at it, should I switch back now to the new bolts? Sure. Okay, switch back to the new bolt. Leave that a little loose, I don't have the bottom one in yet. Bottom bolt. To be honest, I don't know if I'm in the middle of that slot or not, so I might fiddle with that. We'll go ahead and get those tightened. This upper bolt of the sway bar link, it doesn't quite line up. It looks like the sway bar needs to go down a little bit. So I've got myself a crowbar, and I'm going to try and get in here somewhere and see if I can pry that down a little bit. There we go. That worked good, so pry that down a little bit. That'll line up and go in there. Get that tightened up. You can get a 18mm wrench on that flat spot on the back and an 18mm ratchet and socket here and get that tightened up. Okay, get this brake line slid back over this post, and then that 10mm bolt will feed through there and tighten against that nut. Okay. Alright, we've got these two big bolts tightened. I wasn't really able to tell when I was close to the middle of the slot. Probably should have done some marking or something. But anyway, we've got the bottom bolt of the sway bar link tight. Top bolt is tight. So we're done down here. We'll go up top. We'll tighten those three 13mm nuts onto those studs. And basically, other than busy work of putting the tire and wheel back on, we're done. A couple minor things up on top. Great. Okay, the old nuts were 13 millimeter. The ones that came with it are 12. Not a big deal. Down on the bottom, the original bolts had a 21 millimeter bolt head and a 21 millimeter nut. The new bolts had a 21 millimeter nut and an 18 millimeter bolt head. So a couple minor differences there. These top nuts take a little bit of back and forth cross pattern tightening to kind of bring everything up evenly. You'll tighten one and then you'll go back and the other one's loose. Just kind of snug them up in a little pattern. Eventually you'll get to a point where they kind of stop moving and then get them snugged up. We're going to do the other side now, which is the passenger side. I've learned a few things, so I'll throw in a couple of tips here and there. I've got the thing up on jack stands, got a chock under the rear wheel, emergency brake is on, we're ready to take that wheel off and get going. So we've got the same thing here on the other side. We've got those two big bolts. Those are 21 millimeter on each side. The new ones that I got with the Moog Struts are 21 millimeter nuts, and they have an 18 millimeter bolt head, but these are 21 on each side. We're going to put on new sway bar links. We're going to go ahead and spray these down for what it's worth. There's a T40 Torx or star wrench inside there that we can kind of hold. I didn't have a lot of luck with the vice grips back behind because I don't think these things have a flat spot on them. Those are 18 millimeter nuts on those sway bars. Before I had jammed a block underneath that sway bar. I thought it might have some spring to it, but in reality it basically was just sitting there, so that was not an issue. There is a 10 millimeter bolt, the head's in the back there, that holds on this bracket that is supporting your anti-lock brake cable. And then just kind of take note of how that sway bar is in there around that brake cable. If you want to do a little bit of a front end check, right now is a good time to put a couple of lug nuts back on, just barely more than hand tight, just so this drum is good and steady. Then go ahead and grab that drum and the disc or the caliper and kind of wiggle them back and forth, or have somebody turn the steering wheel. And I'm putting some pressure on this caliper, and you want to make sure you're not seeing a lot of movement down in here. You're not hearing any kind of clunk or anything. There's also a way to test a ball joint at this point, but I'm not such an expert at that. But I know it involves basically at this point kind of sticking a pry bar under somewhere and lifting up a little bit and seeing if you can see any movement. Okay, get your 21 millimeter deep socket. It doesn't have to be this deep, but that's what they had. I've got a 25-inch breaker bar. These bolts over here are supposed to have splines on them, and they're not supposed to turn inside here. That was not my experience last night. It went ahead and turned. So I'm going to go ahead and just put this wrench on the other side. Get this broke loose. fairly tight, but not ridiculous. Can't see this one down below, but same thing here. Go ahead and get that 10mm bolt backed out here that's holding the bracket that's supporting the anti-lock brake cable. Then we'll put that little bolt back in the nut for safekeeping. Now we can get these nuts off of here. Get them both off. I'm not going to reuse these bolts. I got new ones that came with the struts, but go ahead and leave the nuts on a little bit to protect the threads. And it takes a pretty fair amount to get those out of there. I'm going to have to move the camera so I can get a good angle and swing at it. Even if you're not going to replace these sway bar links, you have to take this top one out because it's connected to the strut. So spray her down with some special juice and then take a fairly aggressive wire brush and clean those threads out and off about the best you can. And then hit it with some more penetrating oil. You're going to want to give your T40 Torx a couple of love taps. It's going to make it hard to get out of there, but you don't want to strip that out. So you want to be bottomed out in there. 18mm wrench. We'll get a ratchet on there to hold that still, or ideally some kind of a, pry bar or a breaker bar or something like that. So this is the setup I've got. Got my ratchet with the T40 Torx on there. Hopefully when I turn the nut it'll bang up against the strut, and then I'm going to try and lean on that 18mm wrench and see if I can budge this. How about that? Yeah, it definitely was hard to get it off that last 1/4 inch over those exposed threads, so definitely want to clean those up best you can at first. Having that T40 Torx in there with my ratchet bumped up against the strut was great, and then just a lot of hard pulling on this 18mm. It does look like the sway bar kind of sprung up. Today I don't have both wheels jacked up, so that may be causing some tension. This is a crowbar. I've got it under here where I can put a little leverage on that sway bar. Get that sway bar to pop down, then this top piece. Once it's kind of lined up, it'll just push out of there. Now since I'm going to replace these sway bar links, I'm going to need to get down on the bottom. Now it looks like these do, even the factory ones, have a flat. So yeah, there's an 18mm flat spot on there. So we'll see if I can get that flat spot, my wrench on the inside on the flat spot, and then I'm going to get my 1/2 inch drive with an 18mm fairly deep 1/2 inch drive socket and see if I can bust that bottom one loose. It's probably kind of hard to tell what you're looking at, but this is the sway bar link. This is the rod going up. I tried to find the flat on here with an 18mm wrench. I checked the other one. It definitely has a flat, but I couldn't find it. So I went ahead and just put vice grips on there. They're coming around and bumping into the tie rod end. And then basically I've got my ratchet on the other side. Kind of a slow 1/16 of a turn at a time, but just keep going. Alright, I've got the nut completely off of the bottom sway bar bolt, so it's ready to come out. But I'm going to kind of note how it's in there, how it kind of goes down in between this anti-lock brake line. Also on the new one, there are some instructions to mount upper fitting to front. So if I put this thing on like this, my grease fitting is going to be to the back. So I'm going to turn it upside down. And now my grease fitting is toward the front. I'm also going to go ahead and just put one pump of grease in here before I even bother to get it mounted. I think that'll just be the easiest thing to do. So I'll do that. I'll get the new one in place. We'll come back. Go ahead and get this one out of there. Get this new one slid in. Let's just see how this top lines up. Okay, we're a ways off up on top, so we're going to have to use the old pry bar or crowbar to kind of bend that down to get that top one aligned. I'm going to go ahead and get the nut in this bottom one, get it tightened up. Alright, I got that bottom one on, tightened up. You can see there is a flat on there, so I was able to get an 18mm wrench on there and hold it. Probably rather do that than the vice grips. You don't want to rip up that rubber boot, so be careful there. One thing is I finally got it all the way tight. I tried to pull my wrench out of there and it had my wrench pinched in there, so I had to loosen it, 3/4 of a turn, get my wrench out. Then I was able to tighten it and it didn't rotate at that point. So that's how I finished up the tightening. We've got that bottom sway bar link installed in the sway bar. The top one's loose. We've still got the old strut in there. So this would be the point you would be at if you were not going to replace those sway bars. So at this point we're going to move up top. And we're going to remove 2 of those 13mm nuts and leave one of them hanging on by a couple threads. We've got 2 of those nuts all the way off. That last one hanging on by about 2 threads. Now we'll go back under here and remove that final bolt, in my case a punch, and we'll pull that strut out of there. Okay. She's free down here. I'm going to kind of grab it, reach out and get this other nut. Okay. Top nut's free. Now she's loose, so wiggle her around a little bit. Make sure you don't damage your CV boot. Feed her down. Definitely want to bring the bottom of that strut out on the front side of your axle. So then it'll come down far enough you can lean the top back and get it out of there. So there's a little tip for you. Don't try and take it back on the back side of the axle. You want to take that bottom of the strut out towards the front, in front of the axle. At this point you might want to just brush this up a little bit, get this kind of cleaned off. We're ready to slip this new strut in there. Should stand it up by your other one. Make sure it looks correct. This one has a part number with an R at the end of it, so this one goes on the right, which is the passenger side. So remembering how we had to slip this in toward the front to kind of get it down in there, and again make sure you don't scratch the heck out of the fender well of your car. A couple other things you're going to want to have ready is you're going to want to have your big bolts, remembering that the old ones were 21 millimeter on both sides, but so these old ones were 21 millimeter on both sides. The new ones have 21 millimeter nuts and an 18 millimeter head on the bolt, and then another twist up top. Instead of 13 millimeter nuts, those are 12. So I've got the nuts staged up top so that once I get this popped through there, I can reach up there and hopefully get a couple threads in. So let's see if we can muscle this into place here. Of course, I dropped one of those nuts up there, so I'm going to stop, get my light, get a magnet, see what I can do. I got super lucky and found that little booger. Be careful, don't drop them down there. Of course, these are 12 millimeter, the other ones are 13, so if I'd lost it, we'd have had to have a mismatch. Alright, I got that nut in on top, was holding it, then I still had a jack underneath this thing. Didn't need to. I had it, now it popped out on me. Okay. Now in my case, I'm going to have to push down quite a bit. This one for some reason is sprung. Let's see what's... Alright. Got the top one in. Now I think the trick on the other side, I said that you should put it in about the middle of that slot and tighten it down, but I already had the nuts already snugged in, so I couldn't see the slot. But I think the trick will be to tighten this top bolt. Maybe get this bottom one in just a little bit. Yeah, it's going to go into the hole. We'll get this top one tightened, snug, and then we'll adjust it till it's in the middle of the slot. We'll tighten the top one down, then we'll put the bottom one in, tighten that nut, and then our alignment will be, you know, at least in the middle of the road. Last time I learned, these splines didn't hold the bolt, so I've got an 18 millimeter wrench wedged up against the rotor. We'll get this top one snugged up. We'll look down and see if we're about in the middle of the slot on the bottom one. If so, we'll go ahead and tighten it up. And yep, that appears to be in the middle of the slot. I'll show you. You can see the bottom bolt is about in the middle of that slot. In no way am I implying that that means you're aligned. That's just, you know, kind of middle of the road for temporary. I'm going to take this thing in and have it professionally aligned after I get this all completed. We'll go ahead and tighten this bottom one and this top one down. Now's a good time to slip this bracket back onto the strut. Take that little 10 millimeter bolt back out, slide the bracket over the mount, and then I've got to reach in here somehow. I'm going to need two hands, but I'm just going to slip this 10 millimeter bolt back in there, get it tightened up. Okay, this top bolt for the sway bar link is too high, so I've got a crowbar down below, and I'm going to pry it and then reach in there and slide her in the hole. Okay, get that nut on there, take all the tension off. I might put a jack under here. Just keep the tension off of it while I'm tightening it down. So let me get the jack in place, get that nut tightened, and then basically we got to go up top and tighten those 3 12mm nuts, and essentially that's it. Tighten these 3 12mm nuts kind of in a cross pattern as you kind of pull it up tight. Snug them down. Basically you're all done with the strut installation. After that, just check, give yourself a quick once over, make sure you didn't forget anything. There's not a lot to forget, but just see if you remember tightening every bolt and all the brackets are on. And then put the wheel back on, torque her down, schedule an appointment for front end alignment, and you're all done.